Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Thank you for downloading from the BBC. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
BBC World Service, this is the Why Factor with me, Lucy Ash. Today, why we draw, how we get good at it, and what we reveal through our drawings.
The city's so beautiful. They've got the skyline and the high-rise buildings.
Londoner Stephen Wiltshire is world famous for his incredibly detailed urban landscapes.
I start to draw on a sketchbook in pencil to figure out to get to the accurate to figure out the drawing.
To figure out the dimensions.
Yes, and or perspectives sometimes.
He started to draw at the age of 3. Those were the first early drawings he did. And I guess that was his form of communication then, purely because he didn't have the speech.
Annette, Stephen's sister, has come to one of his book signings. Early on, her little brother was diagnosed with autism, and she says he found all human contact difficult, especially after their father's death in a motorcycle accident. Stephen didn't speak when he started primary school.
He would be the pupil in the corner of the class, very quiet, didn't say anything, didn't interact with anyone, and just started scribbling on paper. And each week they would get on the bus and school bus and travel and see different landmarks in London. And they would try and replicate what they had seen for that afternoon. And Stephen was just doing these drawings that were so advanced for his age. They realized that, that something's happening here. So what they did was take away his pen and paper and try to make him ask for it back. And I guess for him the frustration was that he needed the paper and pen so bad that he was forced to say pen and paper, and that was his first words.
The first two words were pen and paper.
Stephen went from a mute, withdrawn child to an artist with his own London gallery, whose work sells for thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. Cityscapes are his trademark, like a 10-metre-long panoramic memory drawing of Tokyo, produced after a single helicopter ride over the Japanese capital.
I go around the world like London, New York, LA, Chicago. I see a bird's eye view from up in a helicopter, and I saw the buildings, the street scenes, and some cars going by, the bridges, and the hills.
And you have so much fantastic detail.
Yeah.
Like the cornices of buildings, the number of windows, the shadows on them from the sun. How do you keep all these things in your head?
Quick sketch on a sketch pad from the air to remember things, memorize it.
You go in the hotel, don't you?
Yeah.
And then you have the night to memorize what you've sketched.
Yeah.
And then you prepare.
Prepare for doing the next day, doing the panorama.
I'm Dr. Rebecca Chamberlain. I'm a psychologist from the University of Leuven in Belgium. We see in people who have drawing expertise that they show larger amounts of grey matter, which is basically the neural matter that makes up the cortex of the brain. We see larger amounts in these structures that are associated with transferring vision to action and also fine motor planning that you need to do when you're drawing.
So if you were going to slice in half the brain of an expert, talented artist, you really would see more grey matter there.
Yeah, you do see more grey matter there. There's a famous study that found that the grey matter of taxi drivers was enhanced in an area called the hippocampus, which is associated with spatial memory. And so we're seeing a lot of these kind of changes in the brain as a result of developing expertise in a particular skill.
Why is it that some people are so much better at translating what they see onto a piece of white paper?
Not surprisingly, practice matters a lot. That's not to say that talent doesn't come into it, but what we're finding with the art students that we study is that the more time they spend drawing, the better they are. And more specifically, the more time they spend taking on new techniques for drawing, the better they are. So it's not just the case that you can just draw for hours and hours on end and you'll necessarily get better. You probably will. But the benefit really comes from finding techniques for seeing the world in different ways. An artist might squint to eliminate the detail that they're seeing in order to look at just the contrast between the dark parts and the light parts. You can also focus on what's called negative space, which is the space between objects rather than looking at the objects themselves. And that really transforms the way you see the world. So I think this is really key.
I'm just sitting here in the studio looking at the computer screen and the microphone.
Yeah.
If I tried to draw the space in between them, why would that make me better?
And one idea is that a classic mistake that novice artists make is that they draw what they know rather than what they see. So we have an idea of, for example, with a face, what the typical face looks like. And when we try and draw a face, we'll usually draw some kind of smiley rather than the actual face that we're looking at. And what focusing on something like negative space seems to do is that because the space doesn't have a meaning, it's not an object, then you're more likely to draw it as it is rather than the objects like the computer screen or the microphone, where you have lots of experience with microphones and you might not actually draw the microphone that's in front of you, but some kind of stored memory of all the microphones you've seen. So particularly for accurate drawing, that seems to be quite critical.
We're going to work with 3 longer poses this afternoon.
There's an atmosphere of intense concentration in this class at the Royal Drawing School. The students are arranging their pencils. They've put up their easels in a semicircle around a couch where a naked model is lying on a sheet with some red cloth draped over him. What made you want to learn to draw?
I think for me, drawing is really about communication. So in the same way that if you see something or you want to describe something or tell a story to somebody, most people would use words, or maybe they'd speak or they would write. And I think for me, I always feel very comfortable and very right kind of drawing as a way of talking to people and as a way of showing things to people.
My name's Sarah Pickstone. I'm teaching at the Royal Drawing School today, and we're in the top of a very beautiful old warehouse building in Shoreditch in East London. Lots of light coming in, very old wooden floor, quiet, peaceful, no mobile phones, no computers. I think you can teach a certain type of drawing to anybody, just as we teach people to read. There's people who maybe are quicker, faster readers than others, or people who enjoy reading more, but nobody questions the fact that you can learn to read. I'm absolutely passionate that everybody should draw for themselves and just make a start, and you do the same subject but you do 20 of them, and you don't look back and you don't judge and you don't say that's really rubbish and stop. Maybe set yourself an hour to do it in every day.
I've just walked into a gallery in the centre of London, and it's a show by Britain's best-known living artist, David Hockney. Mr. Hockney, hello, I'm Lucy Ash from the BBC. I'm doing a programme about why we draw. You once said drawing is like playing chess.
Well, I said it's because you plan ahead. With your marks, you plan ahead. I found it out when I watched myself draw on an iPad, and I realised at any given moment I was seeing it differently to anybody else, because I was always seeing it ahead. When they said, oh, you can give up drawing now, that was because of the photograph. That's because they thought the photograph was it. Well, it isn't it. I've proved it, actually. I'm showing you here. I think drawing is absolutely essential. You've still to use your hand or something, even if you're going to draw on the computer.
Hockney, renowned for his draftsmanship, recently caused a sensation with his boldly coloured digital drawings. Now from a stylus on an iPad to a stick in the sand. Lizzie Ellis is an artist from a remote community west of Alice Springs in Central Australia. Her mother taught her a traditional form of Aboriginal women's art, telling stories by drawing patterns in the sand.
They used to break a branch of a tree, but now we use pieces of wire. It's called a dinta.
Dinta.
Dinta. When I was a teenager, we used to make lovely handles and a lovely notch at the other end, so you'd recognise your story wire.
Tell me, Lizzie, can anyone tell sand stories, or do you have to...
No, only girls and women. It's a cultural tradition. Boys are not allowed, and if they do, we joke, we say to them, don't do that, otherwise you'll get a vagina, because it's only for girls and women. And there's rules of that you're not allowed to tell stories in the sand at night, because if you do, a mamu, kukur, evil spirits, demons of the night, of the land, and steal your spirit, make you sick.
Why is it in your culture that drawing plays such an important part in storytelling?
Well, because we're a nomadic society, when you look at your environment, you use what you've got, the material. So you have the dirt, you have your hands, get a stick, and you draw things. You know, there's many ways of passing on knowledge.
The sand drawings are partly survival guides. Concentric circles, for example, point out waterholes in the desert. But they also convey social norms, such as who you can marry and how to keep a marriage together. Lizzie tells me a story about a man rejected for failing to bring home the bacon, or rather the bush tucker.
Mum used to tell a story where she'd draw the windbreak and she'd use leaves as the props for the characters of the mother and father, and she'd put the mother and father and the baby in the camp in the sand ground, and she'd say, oh, the man would go off hunting, and they pick up the leaf and they walk it out behind your back, like you're on stage. You go out off the stage and then you come back on like that. So they use the leaves as you bring them back into view. And the father would go off hunting. He'd come home empty-handed, and the wife would get angry because she's been waiting for him all day to come back, all afternoon, and she marches off. She makes another camp away from them.
There is a happy ending. The man goes hunting again, successfully this time, cooks some choice morsels of meat and lures his wife back home. The sand stories mix images and speech, but drawing is also often used to express what's too hard to say in words. We're at Kids Company, a London charity for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Today in the art room, they're drawing their dreams.
My name's Mayara. We're doing our dream drawings. It's about me in the water, and I nearly got eaten by a shark.
My name is Sarah, and I'm drawing a picture, me as an angel.
How does it make you feel when you draw? Do you like drawing?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's fun.
But not everybody seems so cheerful.
What are you drawing?
Girl.
It's a girl. She looks like a princess, yeah?
Yeah. Not a happy princess.
Not a happy princess. Is she shouting? Because her mouth's open quite wide, isn't it?
And you're going to colour it? Yeah, no, it's got the tongue inside it now.
Arts manager Jebet Mengech says encouraging children to express themselves with pencils, crayons and felt tips often helps her and her team to identify the vulnerable ones.
Art does allow children to start to tell the stories of things that are going on in their lives. We were asking them to draw the kind of foods that they were eating on a daily basis, and actually there were a lot of empty plates. They were showing us through their work that they really weren't getting enough. And one little boy had chosen to do a desert island. He started to discuss everything that was in his picture, and it was just a desert island. It was like a map, like a pirate map. By the end we realised that it all stemmed back to his mother, who had left and gone back to their country of origin, and no one was really aware it was causing this trauma at home. She'd just sort of left, and he was dealing with the feelings of abandonment. So there was a suitcase, which he was then, when he described it to one of the art therapists, he was able to sort of explain that this was the last thing he saw when his mother left, and that's his memory that he has dreams about and nightmares about. The fact that he was talking about his picture made it easier for him to be able to tell us what was really happening in his life, because it was about the picture.
And if it hadn't been for the drawing of the desert island, would you have not known?
No, sometimes it is very hard to know really what's going on at home. 1 in 6 of the children actually reported things in their artwork big enough to raise what we'd call a cause for concern, something that we feel needs following up. Everything from having mice or rats in the house. Sometimes it was lack of food. Sometimes it was that they were effectively carers themselves for younger siblings. And on a more serious level, we did identify some cases of abuse as well.
What, violence towards children?
Yep, there were incidents of violence, but most commonly it was situations of neglect or children having to survive on their own, really. But yes, there were incidents of violence, and children mentioned knives and things like that in the home as well.
Well, drawing is paying attention. When you draw, your hand seems to pay attention to things that your mind doesn't necessarily pay attention to.
And what good will it bring to you?
I think it helps you pay attention to the world outside. You start to notice things, the connections between things. And you're sitting there in the dentist waiting to go and have your filling, and you suddenly notice how the edge of a lampshade lights up against the back of a rubber plant, or, there's a sort of connection between things. Or you're sitting on the tube and you start noticing people's faces.
So does it just make life less boring in a way?
It makes life a lot less boring, yeah.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.